Chien-Pao Baxcalibur is a promising archetype coming out in our Paldea Evolved set, which has been doing very well in City Leagues throughout April and May in Japan, but struggled to convert in the larger Champions League event in Niigata. Veteran players can't help comparing this deck to an old favourite, Keldeo Blastoise, a top performing deck in the black and white era. In fact, Rain Dance style decks have been a successful strategy since the very first expansion of the Pokemon TCG. So will this new iteration follow its prestigious predecessors, or has the game evolved beyond this strategy and will Baxcalibur be cast aside like many other Rain Dancers in recent history? Today we're going to be discussing the core strategy of Chien-Pao Baxcalibur. I'll provide a starting point deck list with a few other possible inclusions worth considering, and finally I'll touch on Chien-Pao's matchups when facing the format's other top decks. Let's get started. So Baxcalibur is really the card that makes the deck tick. It's a stage 2 water-type Pokemon with the absolute zero ability, which allows us to attach a water energy from our hand to one of our Pokemon as often as we like. Breaking this fundamental 1 energy per turn rule of Pokemon can allow us to use high energy attack costs of Pokemon for large payoffs, and gives the deck an easy way to reload its attackers out of nowhere after suffering knockouts. Baxcalibur's hit points and attack are also worth noting. 160 hit points is chunky for a single prizer, and it deals 130 damage without a drawback, which means Baxcalibur can get into the action in a pinch against other single prize matchups. Of course, we tend to prefer leaving Baxcalibur on the bench rather than in the action, seeing as though it is an integral part of our strategy, and if it goes down without a backup, we could be in trouble. One of the key differences between Baxcalibur and the number of other Rain Dancers in recent times which haven't quite found success is the fact that Baxcalibur has fantastic support cards around it. Irida is going to be a crucial supporter for this deck, as it can find both our Rare Candy and Baxcalibur immediately off one supporter effect. In fact, Irida is just an exceptional card in the deck in general. It's fantastic on the opening turns to get our Bull Search and other Pokemon developed, and it can help cherry pick some key item cards throughout the game. Now let's take a closer look at Chien-Pao EX. It's a basic water-type Pokemon, which we will be using as our main attacking option when we come up against multi-prize matchups. Chien-Pao's Hail Blizzard attack deals 60 damage times the number of water energy we discard from our Pokemon. Needing sometimes 5 or 6 energy all in the turn to reach 1 hit KOs may seem like a daunting task, but fear not, because we also have the incredible Trembling Cold ability to help us out. When Chien-Pao EX is in the active position, we can search for 2 water energy from our deck and put them directly into our hand. Obviously, this is a great way to access the waters in the opening stages, and bear in mind that this ability is not limited to just one Chien-Pao per turn, so switching between your EXs can escalate the amount of water energy that we can grab very quickly. This combination of Chien-Pao and Baxcalibur is going to be the backbone of the archetype, grabbing our energy from the deck and immediately rain dancing them onto the board in one go. Chien-Pao is more than happy to come up against other multi-prize matchups, but we are going to need some help when it comes to some single prize matchups. Radiant Greninja is a no-brainer in the deck, as we have constant access to energy, and we can make use of the Moonlight Shuriken attack as early as turn 2, forcing decks to commit their own Bull Search and bench space to a Manaphy in the opening stages, or face the Wrath of Greninja. Kyogre is also a great choice here. 180 damage is perfect for handling pretty much all single prize threats, and is another way that we can pressurize our opponent's bench, with this snipe capable of even knocking out Lumineon V or Squawkabilly EX for an easy uptrade without the need for boss's orders. Speaking of all this sniping, we probably need to protect ourselves against mirror match situations and lost box decks which have the option to use Mirage Gate Greninja combos, so adding a Manaphy seems like a responsible adult decision. Also, adding a copy of Lumineon V into the deck makes a ton of sense here. It activates our Ultra Balls, which we'll be playing in high counts, to increase our odds of finding that Irida combination to get our turn 2 Baxcalibur rolling. Let's not forget, of course, that we can use Lumineon as an attacker if need be. It can be very handy against single prizes. We can actually punish the likes of Escape Rope by throwing a fish into the active position to take a hit and then simply jump back into the deck afterwards, undoing the turn of damage. Next, we'll start to fill out the deck with a number of ball search cards. We want a decent chunk of these because we need at least a couple Frigibax in the opening stages, especially when we are going second, and having access to multiple Chien-Pao EX to retreat around our board and thin the deck of energy is also really helpful. Battle VIP Pass, Nest Balls, Ultra Balls, and Rare Candies all make their way into the deck in high counts to go reliably wide in the early stages, and we're also going to play the copy of Hisuian Heavy Ball here. We can grab this at any time with Irida, so it's always very helpful for cherry picking Pokemon which have found their way into the prize cards. Superior Energy Retrieval is a returning item to the TCG, which is integral to giving this deck enough fuel to see us through the game, even when Chien-Pao is throwing our energy into the discard pile from turn to turn. We're also going to add a copy of Super Rod, another returning item to the TCG, which serves a similar purpose as the Superior Energy Retrieval, seeing as though we can immediately access the energy we put back into the deck with Chien-Pao EX, but it can also reload our lower counts of single prize attackers in the matchups where they're relevant. With both Ultra Ball and Superior Energy Retrieval at our disposal, we have many ways of reducing our hand size, making Bibarel an excellent inclusion into the deck. Bibarel gives us some added draw power throughout the game, and offers protection against Iono. Pretty much every deck in format is going to have to respect Iono in some way, and in this case Bibarel makes a lot of sense, seeing as though we want to constantly reload a ton of energy turn by turn and develop different attackers. Next up, we're going to play a few switching options in Escape Rope and Switch, seeing as though we are playing some high retreat cost Pokemon. But there's also the added benefit of us dancing between our Chien-Pao EXs, which we talked about earlier, to thin our deck of energy. Which brings us nicely onto our stadium count. We're going to be playing a couple of copies of Skater's Park. There are some cool plays you can make with this card in this list. With Baxcalibur already developed and Chien-Pao EX in the active position, we can use that Trembling Cold ability, attach them both to our active Pokemon, and use Skater's Park to give us a refund on those energies before using our next Chien-Pao EX. It's of course really important that we play a number of stadiums in the deck anyway, seeing as though we want to have bounces to Path to the Peak, so we have access to our Radiant Greninja's draw power and our Chien-Pao EXs. We're also going to include a copy of Lost Vacuum for a similar reason here, the difference being that Lost Vacuum's of course an item card, so it can be Irida searchable if we're desperate for a stadium bounce. But we also have the added benefit of being able to remove some tools from play. Joining our 4 copies of Irida, which is pretty much mandatory for this deck, we're also going to be playing a few copies of Iono for our own element of hand disruption in the deck, a Professor's Research for a deeper dig, which we can of course find with Lumineon when it's necessary, and Boss's Orders all make good sense here. So with all that said and done, we have our starting point list. I personally really enjoy the streamlined, straightforward nature of the starting point list, however there are some other cards worth considering. Palkia V-Star is an exceptionally powerful card, and even as a thin line in the deck, could provide a slightly bulkier 2-prize attacker, and also offer some additional burst energy acceleration with its V-Star power. Star Portal could end up being a fallback if we happen to whiff a turn 2 Rare Candy combo, and I've also found it very effective as an attacking option against Ting Lu EX decks, so if we're expecting that to be a big deck in the format, I think a decent reaction would be adding in your Palkias. Weaving in some Charm of Courage could also be really helpful to the deck, giving a hit point buff to our Chien-Pao EX to make it a bit less of a glass cannon. A cheeky copy of Avery in the deck can also be devastating for certain opponents. Avery's been used to great success in the past with sniping decks like Urshifu, as it helps limit the player's bench and gives them a decision whether or not to keep their Manaphy in play. It's really a win-win situation for us, as we're happy reducing the opponent's bench options, and more than happy to cash in on prize cards if the opponent removes their Manaphy protection. Path to the Peak isn't ever going to be seen in high counts in the deck list, but it could be a nice defensive play against Mew or Gardevoir players when combined with our own Iono, so it could be worth the inclusion to give the deck more combat potential. Now let's take a look at how Chien-Pao attempts to navigate some of its top tier matchups. Against Gardevoir EX, we attempt to present as many single prize attacking threats as possible. Threatening spread from the beginning of the game is important, but typically using our Gust on engine Pokemon like Kirlia is a higher priority than Manaphy itself. Seeing as though we can often be the ones going ahead in a prize race, simply hurting their engine can buy us even more time. Against Lugia, we're going to have to adapt to their mixture of single and multi-prize attackers, and essentially just respond accordingly. Kyogre's likely to shine in this matchup if ever the opponent is forced to use their own Lumineon V in the opening turns, because that's an easy way for us to take a 2-prize knockout. Against Lost Zone box, we have several quite chunky single-prize attackers, including our Baxcalibur itself, so should be pretty at home to rinse and repeat these with Super Rod. An early Lumineon V can punish their use of Escape Rope and can leap back into the deck, so feel free to proactively fish to find the likes of Boss's Orders, target their Manaphy, or Iono for that hand disruption. Mew can be somewhat of a slugfest, and Chien-Pao EX is likely to shine, but try to develop Bibarel before committing to a big VMAX KO, seeing as though the Mew player will likely be throwing an Iono plus Path combination back at you the next turn. It looks as though Arceus decks shouldn't be that much trouble, seeing as though we have great ways to uptrade, and Arceus struggles to deal with Chien-Pao EXs. This really comes down to the partners the Arceus players are choosing to use, so be mindful of the likes of Flying Pikachu and Alolan Vulpix V-Star. Outside of these attackers, Arceus shouldn't be too much of an issue. I hope you enjoyed today's video on Chein-Pao Baxcalibur. I'm really excited to see Rain Dance style decks back at the top tier of the Pokemon TCG. Let me know your thoughts down below, and I'll see you tomorrow for another video. Cheers.